The information provided in this comprehensive masterclass is strictly for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute professional business, financial, legal, or digital marketing advice. The algorithms governing social media platforms are proprietary, highly complex, and subject to constant, unannounced alterations, particularly within the highly competitive digital landscape of the United States. The strategic frameworks, historical trends, and specific case studies discussed throughout this presentation represent potential outcomes based on extensive observation of past market behavior and do not guarantee future results or specific metrics. Attempting to rapidly scale a digital presence involves inherent risks, including the potential loss of substantial time, creative energy, and financial capital invested in content production or paid distribution. Viewers are strongly advised to conduct their own thorough due diligence, research the most current terms of service for individual platforms, and consider consulting with a certified digital marketing professional or legal advisor before implementing any large-scale strategies to ensure strict compliance with all applicable regional laws and Federal Trade Commission guidelines regarding digital advertising and disclosures. Your individual trajectory will ultimately depend on your unique execution, shifting market conditions, and numerous external variables that remain entirely outside the scope of this educational material. The social media algorithms are not broken, they are functioning exactly as their engineers intended, and they are currently acting as an active barrier to your organic reach. If you are operating within the United States right now, staring at a piece of content you spent 8 hours meticulously scripting, filming, and editing, only to watch its performance flatline at a fraction of your historical average, you must understand that you are participating in a system that has been systematically fundamentally re-engineered to gatekeep visibility. You are not shadow banned by a malicious moderator. Your content is likely not inherently flawed. You are simply playing a rulebook from 3 years ago, in a radically transformed digital economy that no longer rewards those specific inputs. Consider the overwhelming historical trends we have observed over the past 36 months. The organic reach for an average non-institutional creator targeting the domestic market has experienced a severe, documented contraction. We are actively navigating what industry analysts refer to as the Great Engagement Recession. The era of casually posting a reasonably well-lit photograph or a moderately entertaining short video and experiencing passive, viral audience acquisition is definitively over. The major technological conglomerates governing these platforms have aggressively shifted their primary operational objectives. They no longer exist to serve as a decentralized discovery engine for your personal brand or small business. Their sole mandate is to function as an inescapable, frictionless entertainment ecosystem designed to retain individual user attention at all absolute costs, thereby serving highly targeted, premium-priced advertising inventory. Let us examine a typical case study that illustrates a pattern repeating thousands of times a day across the country. Imagine a dedicated creator based in an American suburb. They invest heavily in their infrastructure, acquiring professional lighting, advanced editing suites, and high-fidelity audio equipment. They study the pacing of successful peers. They execute a consistent publishing schedule, carefully deploying every recommended hashtag strategy, audio trend, and metadata optimization technique available. For the initial phase of their campaign, they might experience a modest spike in viewership. A documented psychological reinforcement tactic platforms occasionally deployed to incentivize continuous upload behavior from new accounts. But inevitably, the algorithmic plateau arrives. The engagement graph resembles a heart monitor flatlining. The creator frantically pivots, altering their visual packaging, rewriting their copy, and pouring even more capital into production value. Yet the core metrics stubbornly refuse to demonstrate sustainable growth. The psychological toll of this cycle is immense and well documented. Creators are abandoning the ecosystem at unprecedented rates, incorrectly concluding that the market is simply too saturated, or that they lack some undefinable, charismatic quality required for digital success. However, attributing this failure to market saturation is a fundamental misdiagnosis of the underlying structural problem. The United States continues to boast some of the highest daily per capita social media consumption rates globally. The audience is demonstrably present. The attention bandwidth is entirely available. What has changed is the complex mechanical architecture by which that attention is distributed and monetized. We have witnessed a total industry transition from social graphs, which historically prioritized content originating from accounts a user explicitly chose to follow, to algorithmic interest graphs. These modern interest graphs utilize unimaginably complex, predictive machine learning models to determine exactly what specific piece of media will prevent a user from closing the application for one more crucial second, with almost zero regard for who actually created that media. This paradigm shift means your accumulated follower count is rapidly depreciating as a reliable metric of guaranteed future distribution. You are no longer just competing against the creators in your specific niche. You are essentially competing against every single piece of highly optimized media ever uploaded to the server, every single time you press publish. Furthermore, the platforms themselves are locked in a brutal, zero-sum war for daily active users. When a novel consumption format demonstrates higher retention rates, such as the massive industry pivot toward hyper-edited, short-form vertical video, every major platform aggressively alters their underlying code to artificially inflate the distribution of that specific format while actively suppressing traditional, static posts or long-form external links. If you are not deeply fluent in these tectonic architectural shifts, you are essentially attempting to navigate a sprawling modern digital metropolis using a cartographic map drawn a decade ago. You will inevitably find yourself facing algorithmic dead ends, fundamentally confused as to why the exact tactical maneuvers that propelled legacy creators to prominence just a few years ago are now yielding absolute, deafening silence. This reality introduces a critical, highly sensitive variable, an open loop in your digital strategy that you absolutely must resolve if you intend to survive in this ecosystem. What is the precise psychological trigger that compels an interest-based algorithm to prioritize your specific upload over the millions of competing videos processed in that exact same hour? Why does a seemingly unpolished, mundane video command massive domestic attention, while a highly capitalized, cinematic production is immediately buried by the platform? The answer is not arbitrary luck, nor is it related to the platform subjectively favoring certain individuals. It is a precise, entirely replicable mathematical formula based on observable behavioral psychology and sequential algorithmic triggers. And until you achieve a granular understanding of the three hidden retention metrics that actually govern scalable reach in the current US consumer market, you will continue to bleed vital resources into an algorithmic void. This fundamental problem brings us to the core promise of this deep dive masterclass. In this presentation, we are going to completely deconstruct the hidden mechanics of why your social media engagement is currently depressed and, crucially, provide a highly specific, tactical and data-driven roadmap designed to reverse this negative trajectory. We are entirely discarding vague, unhelpful industry platitudes such as the command to just be more authentic, or the overly simplistic advice to merely post more consistently. Instead, we are going to rigorously analyze the underlying structural architecture of digital attention. Throughout this comprehensive breakdown, you will acquire a sophisticated understanding of the current algorithmic landscape as it specifically applies to the psychological consumption habits of the United States audience. We will initiate this process by helping you identify the fatal, often invisible structural flaws currently embedded within your existing content strategy, the silent, compounding errors you are likely executing right now that actively signal to the platform's machine learning models that your content should be throttled and suppressed. We will thoroughly examine recent historical data to demonstrate exactly how the empirical definition of high-quality content has fundamentally evolved from a standard of mere visual, cinematic aesthetic to a strict standard of deep, measurable psychological retention. You will be instructed on how to properly interpret your own internal analytics, shifting your perspective from viewing them as a subjective report card of your creative worth to utilizing them as a precise, clinical diagnostic tool that pinpoints exactly where user attention fractures and abandons your content. We will explore detailed case studies of diverse digital accounts that successfully recognize their critical errors and pivoted out of severe engagement slumps. We will break down the exact variables they manipulated to successfully re-trigger algorithmic favor, including a forensic second-by-second analysis of narrative pacing, the strategic construction of visual hooks, and the calculated deployment of cognitive tension to artificially inflate average view duration. Furthermore, we will outline a rigorous step-by-step methodological approach for explicitly aligning your future content production with the specific, demanding consumption patterns of the contemporary US demographic. This instruction involves understanding the subtle but vital cultural shifts in digital humor, the rapidly rising consumer demand for hyperniche, demonstrably competent authority, and the absolute critical importance of formatting all media for a zero-friction consumption experience. We will explore the specific mechanical levers of audience retention, moving far beyond the rudimentary concept of optimizing the first 3 seconds to establishing a granular, advanced understanding of how to maintain a viewer's psychological and emotional investment throughout the entirety of a digital presentation. This is a systematic, highly intentional approach to reclaiming your digital real estate, requiring the abandonment of outdated tactics and the full embrace of platform mechanics. Let us immediately begin the vital process of diagnosing your engagement failures and rebuilding your underlying strategy from the structural foundation upward. The full embrace of platform mechanics. Let us immediately begin the vital process of diagnosing your engagement failures and rebuilding your underlying strategy from the structural foundation upward. In the current landscape of 2026, the United States digital consumer market operates under a completely revolutionized set of algorithmic rules. The era of relying on discoverability hacks is definitively over. You can no longer manipulate your way into a user feed through sheer technical optimization. Imagine if you dedicate weeks of development to building a sophisticated Python automation program designed to manage your entire content pipeline. You meticulously integrate advanced language models like the Gemini API to rapidly generate perfectly calibrated descriptions, meticulously research the exact search volume for localized tags, and schedule your uploads down to the absolute optimal millisecond for the East Coast demographic. You have engineered a flawless, frictionless distribution machine. Yet, when the automated system publishes the content, the engagement metrics completely flatline. Why does this happen? Because the machine learning models governing social distribution in 2026 do not prioritize metadata perfection. They prioritize human behavioral retention above all other data points. You successfully built a highly efficient delivery mechanism for a product that the end consumer fundamentally abandoned after just 2 seconds of exposure. This fundamental disconnect between technical optimization and psychological retention is the primary reason your engagement is plummeting. To understand the practical application of this shift, let us examine a documented case study of a creator operating within the highly saturated domestic finance and insurance sector. We will analyze a professional based in Chicago named Michael, who launched a digital campaign designed to educate consumers about complex policy decisions. His initial major upload was a highly stylized, cinematic presentation titled 5 Mistakes to Avoid When Getting Car Insurance Quotes Online. Michael invested significant capital into professional lighting, aesthetic background roll, and perfect audio mixing. He heavily researched his target audience and utilized every recommended metadata strategy. The initial result was a catastrophic algorithmic failure. The video barely registered a few hundred impressions before the platform entirely choked its distribution. Instead of assuming the market was simply too crowded, Michael treated his platform analytics as a clinical diagnostic instrument. He reviewed his audience retention graph and observed a severe vertical drop-off occurring exactly at the 4-second mark. This specific data visualization represents the exact fraction of a second the artificial intelligence categorized his entire production as low-value media. His audience did not abandon the video because the underlying information about car insurance was inaccurate. They abandoned it because his introductory pacing was too slow, his visual presentation felt overly commercial, and he failed to immediately establish a high-stakes narrative. He was attempting to sell educational competence before earning basic psychological attention. Michael aggressively pivoted his strategy to align with the brutal retention mechanics of 2026. He completely discarded the polished, slow-moving cinematic aesthetic. For his next upload covering the exact same subject matter, he transitioned to a raw talking form format. He positioned himself close to the camera lens, eliminating any physical distance between himself and the viewer. More importantly, he re-engineered his opening sequence. Instead of a slow, branded introduction, he launched immediately into a high-stakes, specific scenario that directly challenged a widely held assumption about domestic insurance policies. He utilized a rapid, direct verbal hook that immediately validated the viewer decision to stop scrolling, followed by a structured, narrative-driven explanation of the core concepts. The platform algorithms instantly registered the massive spike in average view duration. Because viewers were now consistently watching past the critical 30-second threshold, the internal systems recognized the media as a highly effective attention retention asset and subsequently pushed the content to hundreds of thousands of new non-follower accounts across the country. This requirement for deep, authentic narrative structure extends far beyond the financial or educational sectors. It is an absolute necessity for visual arts and e-commerce. Consider another scenario involving a small business owner in Oregon attempting to scale a specialized craft brand. Her primary inventory consisted of highly detailed, handmade physical products, specifically items like classic red rose framed needlepoint artwork and complex golden floral framed needlepoint artwork. In previous years, her strategy relied heavily on posting simple, aesthetically pleasing looping videos set to trending background music. She depended entirely on the platform to find buyers based on visual appeal and generic hashtags. By the first quarter of 2026, this strategy yielded zero measurable growth. The algorithm had evolved to suppress passive, strictly visual catalog content that failed to foster active community participation. To reverse this terminal decline, she had to stop treating her social feed as a digital storefront and start treating it as a documentary platform. She shifted her content strategy away from merely showcasing the final needlepoint artwork and began documenting the grueling, meticulous physical process required to punch every single thread. She narrated the videos with her authentic voice, discussing her specific artistic frustrations, the historical context of the floral patterns she selected, and the intricate, localized sourcing of her framing materials. By exposing the messy, highly involved reality behind the polished final product, she stopped competing on pure aesthetic value and began competing on human connection and narrative investment. Viewers stopped scrolling not just to look at a picture of a rose, but to follow the high-stakes journey of its creation. The engagement metrics exponentially increased because the algorithm detected that users were not only watching the videos entirely through, but were actively saving the content and utilizing the comment section to ask highly specific questions about her technique. These case studies illustrate the definitive reality of the current digital economy. The platforms have successfully transformed into massive, highly efficient search engines and entertainment ecosystems that demand zero-friction consumption experiences. Your audience has developed an incredibly sophisticated, nearly subconscious filter for anything that feels vaguely promotional, slightly unoriginal, or poorly paced. If your current strategy relies on hoping that your chosen keywords will magically circumvent a fundamentally boring presentation, you are setting yourself up for failure. You must ruthlessly audit your existing content library and identify exactly where you are losing your audience. You must strip away the unnecessary polish and rebuild your media around structured, repeatable frameworks designed specifically to hold attention captive. But recognizing these structural flaws and understanding the absolute necessity of high-retention storytelling is merely the diagnostic phase of our process. Knowing that you need to instantly captivate an American audience and actually possessing the precise mechanical knowledge to force those algorithmic gates to open are two entirely different disciplines. What exactly are the specific sequential psychological triggers you must embed in the first 3 seconds to physically prevent a consumer from swiping past your upload? The formula is not arbitrary. It is an exact science based on cognitive friction, and it involves a highly specific, rapidly deployable technique that the top 1% of creators are utilizing right now to monopolize digital attention. 5 social media trends you need to know for 2026. This video breaks down key shifts and data-backed insights regarding content creation habits and trends that are essential for driving growth on major platforms this year. 5 social media trends you need to know for 2026. YouTube. Jade Beeson 50K views. As industry analysts studying these exact content creation habits and trends consistently point out, the foundational architecture of digital attention has been completely rewritten for the current calendar year. The underlying behavioral psychology of the American consumer has radically adapted to the sheer volume of available media. We must explore a critical concept that fundamentally dictates whether your content survives the initial algorithmic filtering process. In the high-velocity scrolling environment of 2026, you are no longer fighting for the first 3 seconds of attention. That benchmark is a relic of a past digital era. You are currently fighting for the first 800 milliseconds. The human brain processes visual stimuli in approximately 13 milliseconds, meaning that by the time your viewer has consciously realized they are looking at your specific upload, their subconscious has already made a definitive neurochemical decision about whether to stay or swipe. If you introduce any cognitive friction during this microscopic window, you trigger an immediate exit response. To understand the sheer magnitude of this psychological barrier, imagine if you are a highly technical creator, let us call him David, operating out of Austin, Texas. David decides to solve his low engagement problem through sheer technological brute force and advanced systems architecture. He spends months developing a sophisticated Python program designed to completely automate his entire digital ecosystem. He successfully integrates the YouTube Data API version 3 to manage his complex upload pipeline, scheduling educational videos with flawless mathematical precision. To ensure his packaging is elite, he utilizes state-of-the-art artificial intelligence, tapping directly into the Gemini 2.5 Pro architecture, to leverage its superior multimodal capabilities. He uses this specific model to process video context and generate hyper-optimized, localized tagging structures tailored perfectly for the domestic market. For his visual presentation, he deploys Imagen 4.0 models to generate stunning, photorealistic thumbnails that theoretically should command massive click-through rates based on historical data. From a purely structural and technical standpoint, David has engineered a masterpiece of modern content distribution. His workflow is immaculate. Yet, when the campaign launches, the historical trends of channel stagnation repeat themselves, and his retention curves immediately crash. The potential outcomes he modeled entirely failed to materialize in the real world. Why does this happen? Because while David perfectly optimized the machine delivery mechanism, he completely neglected the human biological receiver. He relied on algorithmic perfection to compensate for a fundamental lack of raw narrative tension. His highly polished, AI-generated thumbnails secured the initial click, but his actual video content began with a standard, low-energy greeting that failed to immediately deliver on the immense visual promise of the thumbnail. He created a fatal disconnect between the packaging and the product, resulting in the platform aggressively penalizing his content for poor retention patterns. What David lacked, and what you must entirely master to scale in the United States market, is the immediate deployment of cognitive tension. Tension is not merely conflict or loud noises. It is the strategic, calculated withholding of critical information, while simultaneously proving to the viewer that you possess that exact information. When a user opens a social application, they are typically in a state of passive dopamine seeking. They are actively looking to be distracted by frictionless entertainment. To break that passive state and force active, invested engagement, you must introduce a severe pattern interrupt. A pattern interrupt is a sudden, unexpected visual or auditory shift that forces the human brain to allocate conscious processing power to understand the current environment. We can observe this mechanic clearly by examining a case study involving a real estate and market analysis consultant named Sarah, based in Columbus, Ohio. Her historical content consisted of generic, highly professional market updates. She would begin her videos standing completely still in an empty corporate office, formally introducing her credentials and stating that she was going to discuss upcoming interest rate fluctuations. Her engagement was virtually non-existent because she offered zero pattern interrupt. We systematically restructured her entire opening sequence using the strict principles of cognitive tension. Instead of a formal introduction, her new upload began with her walking rapidly outside a visibly recognizable, moderately priced suburban home. The camera was entirely in motion. Her opening statement bypassed all pleasantries and directly addressed a terrifying historical trend for local buyers, highlighting a specific, obscure zoning law change in her specific county that was quietly inflating property taxes. She did not promise a magical financial solution. She presented a severe, highly localized problem that her specific target demographic simply could not afford to ignore. The retention data from Sarah's pivot demonstrated a massive, sustained spike in viewership. Viewers were compelled to watch until the very end because the cognitive tension she introduced in the first 800 milliseconds could only be resolved by consuming the entirety of her educational breakdown. This brings us to the mechanical reality of how algorithms evaluate your content in 2026. The machine learning models are no longer just looking at view duration, they are heavily weighting micro-behaviors. Did the user increase the volume of their device? Did they physically tap the screen to pause and read a document you displayed? Did they expand the description box to verify a statistic? These are monumental signals of active cognitive engagement that completely override the negative signal of passive swiping. Your script must deliberately orchestrate these exact physical interactions. You must design moments where the viewer feels physically compelled to interact with the interface to fully grasp the educational value you are providing. Let us break down the exact mathematical reality of a successful upload in this hyper-competitive environment. If you produce a 10-minute educational masterclass, the platform systems require you to maintain a minimum of 50% average view duration to even qualify for secondary widespread algorithmic distribution. That means you must hold the undivided, intense attention of a highly distracted American consumer for 5 consecutive minutes. This is a monumental psychological feat that cannot be achieved by merely being factually correct. You must be structurally calculated. You must utilize micro-narratives within your overarching macro-narrative. Every 60 to 90 seconds, you must intentionally reset the viewer's baseline attention span by introducing a new, highly relevant variable, a shifting camera perspective, or a compelling data visualization that fundamentally alters their current understanding of the topic at hand. If you allow the pacing to stagnate into a monotonous educational lecture, the viewer's brain will naturally habituate to the stimulus, and they will abandon the video entirely regardless of how valuable the underlying information might be. You now understand that the first 800 milliseconds are critical for survival, and that cognitive tension is the absolute currency of retention. You understand exactly why purely technical, automated solutions fail entirely without human psychological framing, and you understand the necessity of engineering active micro-behaviors. But how do you actually write this precise tension into your script? What are the exact step-by-step structural formulas for constructing those critical opening sentences that bypass the subconscious filter? There is a highly specific, clinical framework for writing the perfect psychological hook, a framework that leverages behavioral economics to literally command the viewer's focus. The digital educators who master this single framework are the ones currently monopolizing the domestic market share, while everyone else continues to broadcast to an empty room. In the next phase of our comprehensive breakdown, we are going to entirely strip away the underlying theory and provide you with the exact scripting templates that the highest retaining channels in the country are currently deploying to force algorithmic compliance, and we will reveal the one catastrophic writing mistake that virtually ensures your audience will abandon your video before you even finish your first spoken sentence. The catastrophic writing mistake that instantly terminates viewer retention is the contextual preamble. In the current digital landscape of 2026, the American consumer has developed a severe neurological allergy to introductory pleasantries. When you begin a video by stating your name, introducing your professional background, or welcoming the audience back to your feed, you are committing digital suicide. You are signaling to the machine learning algorithms that your content is low urgency. The human brain, specifically the amygdala, is constantly scanning the environment for immediate threats or high-value opportunities. When it encounters a slow, polite introduction, it immediately categorizes the stimulus as safe but irrelevant, prompting an involuntary physical response to swipe away. The algorithm monitors this micro-behavior across thousands of devices and instantly throttles your reach, permanently burying your hard work in the algorithmic graveyard. To reverse this trend, you must adopt the precise scripting templates utilized by the highest retaining channels in the United States. The most consistently effective framework observed in historical trends is the negative bias hook. Evolutionary psychology dictates that humans are hardwired to prioritize negative information over positive information to ensure survival. If you present a potential threat to their financial stability, their social status, or their physical well-being, their brain physically cannot ignore it. Imagine if you are a certified public accountant based in Dallas named Robert, trying to educate local business owners about tax compliance. If Robert starts his video by saying he is going to share 3 helpful tax tips, his engagement will flatline. He is providing a contextual preamble. Instead, Robert must utilize the negative bias hook. He must look directly into the camera lens and state that a specific, overlooked clerical error in the recent 2026 local tax code revision is actively triggering devastating federal audits for small businesses in Texas. He has not guaranteed a negative outcome, nor is he providing risky financial advice. He is leveraging historical trends and a highly specific potential outcome to create massive cognitive tension. The viewer, particularly a business owner, experiences a sudden spike in cortisol and must watch the remainder of the video to resolve the psychological discomfort Robert just introduced. The second highly effective scripting template is the data-backed anomaly. This framework relies on presenting a verifiable statistic that directly contradicts the established worldview of your target demographic. The American public in 2026 is constantly bombarded with predictable marketing statistics. To break through this noise, you must present an anomaly. Let us analyze a case study of an online educator named Sarah operating out of Chicago, who teaches digital marketing strategies to independent contractors. Her previous content focused on broad, generic advice regarding posting schedules, which resulted in deeply suppressed engagement. We restructured her approach using the data-backed anomaly. She began her next upload by stating that over 70% of local contractors who posted daily on social media actually saw a verifiable decrease in direct consumer inquiries over the last 2 quarters. She then immediately transitioned into explaining the specific algorithm shift that caused this historical trend. By presenting a statistic that completely defied the conventional wisdom of posting more frequently, she created an intellectual void. The viewer is forced to stay and consume the educational content to reconcile the conflicting information presented in the opening seconds. The third framework is the direct identity challenge. This is perhaps the most advanced and highly retentive scripting technique available, but it requires absolute precision to avoid violating community guidelines or alienating your core audience. The objective is not to insult the viewer, but to challenge a deeply held assumption they have about their own industry or personal practices. Imagine if you are a fitness professional in Miami named Michael, focusing on biomechanics and structural health. The standard, low-retention approach would be to offer a generic tutorial on proper lifting form. The direct identity challenge approach requires Michael to open his video by demonstrating a universally accepted stretching routine and stating that this specific movement pattern, which the viewer likely performs every single morning, is fundamentally degrading their joint mobility based on recent kinesiology case studies. He is directly challenging their behavioral identity. The viewer is compelled to watch because they need to know if their daily routine is actually causing them physical harm. They are seeking educational validation or correction. Executing these templates requires strict adherence to a specific structural rhythm. You cannot simply deliver the hook and then revert to a slow, methodical lecture. The pacing must remain relentless. Once you have established the initial cognitive tension using the negative bias, the data-backed anomaly, or the direct identity challenge, you have exactly 5 to 7 seconds to validate the premise of your hook. You must immediately provide the first piece of concrete evidence or logical reasoning that supports your opening statement. If you fail to validate the hook quickly, the viewer will feel manipulated, categorizing your content as clickbait, which leads to an immediate exit and a severe algorithmic penalty. After the initial validation phase, you must transition into the core educational payload of your video, breaking down the complex information into highly digestible sequential steps. Throughout this educational payload, you must continuously deploy internal retention mechanisms. These are secondary hooks embedded deep within the body of the script, designed to re-engage the viewer just as their attention begins to drift. You can achieve this by constantly shifting the emotional tone, introducing new variables to the initial problem, or utilizing rhetorical questions that force the viewer to mentally participate in the educational process. For example, after explaining the technical details of the tax code revision, Robert the accountant should ask his audience to mentally calculate how many times they submitted a specific form last year, immediately followed by the potential financial consequence of a single miscalculation. This forces the viewer out of a passive consumption state and into an active analytical state, dramatically extending the average view duration. Furthermore, the language you select must be incredibly precise and devoid of any linguistic fluff. Every single adjective and adverb must serve a specific structural purpose. In 2026, the algorithmic filters are highly sensitive to filler words and repetitive phrasing. If your script contains long, rambling sentences with multiple subordinate clauses, the viewer will lose the narrative thread and swipe away. You must utilize short, declarative statements. You must speak in the active voice. You must eliminate all instances of tentative language such as I think, maybe, or potentially, unless you are legally required to do so when discussing sensitive topics. Your vocal delivery must project absolute authority and absolute competence, even when you are simply exploring historical trends or theoretical case studies. The viewer must subconsciously trust that you are the definitive source of information on this specific topic within the first 10 seconds of exposure. However, possessing the perfect script is only half of the structural equation required to dominate the United States digital ecosystem. You can deploy the most advanced cognitive tension frameworks, completely eliminate the contextual preamble, and maintain a relentless verbal pace. But if your visual presentation fundamentally contradicts your auditory message, the algorithm will still suppress your content. The human brain processes visual information exponentially faster than auditory information. If your script is aggressively promising high-stakes educational value, but your visual framing is static, poorly lit, and lacks dynamic movement, the viewer experiences massive cognitive dissonance. Their eyes are telling them the video is low effort, while their ears are hearing high-value promises. In this conflict, the visual cortex always wins, and the viewer will abandon the upload. We have established exactly what words you must speak to hijack human attention, but we have not yet addressed the incredibly complex, often misunderstood visual architecture required to support those words. How do you physically structure your shooting environment, your camera angles, and your on-screen movement to perfectly synchronize with these high-retention scripting templates without requiring a Hollywood production budget? The answer lies in a controversial visual editing technique that is currently completely reshaping how educational content is produced in America. And if you fail to implement this specific visual framework, your perfect script will be rendered completely useless. The technique is known within advanced creator networks as kinetic frame isolation, and it operates on the foundational biological principle that the human eye is evolutionarily engineered to track movement, contrast, and depth in order to survive. When you present a static visual field to an audience in the United States, a demographic that currently consumes an average of 5 to 7 hours of highly stimulating digital media every single day, their visual cortex habituates to your presentation within approximately 4 seconds. Habituation means their brain literally stops processing the visual data of your video because it has deemed the environment unchanging and therefore non-threatening and uninteresting. You can be delivering the most profound, life-altering educational script ever written, leveraging the perfect negative bias hook, but if your body is completely still, your camera is locked on a tripod in a wide shot, and your background is flat, the viewer will experience an overwhelming subconscious urge to swipe away to find a new visual stimulus. Kinetic frame isolation entirely bypasses this habituation by artificially forcing the viewer's eye to constantly readjust to new focal points, thereby keeping their brain locked in an active state of processing. To understand the sheer power of this framework, let us examine a creator named Thomas operating out of Seattle, Washington. Thomas runs a highly technical channel focused on digital infrastructure, specifically teaching his audience how to build a Python program to automate their back-end video management. He meticulously details how to integrate the YouTube Data API version 3, and he spends hours scripting complex tutorials on leveraging the advanced multimodal capabilities of Gemini 2.5 Pro to generate dynamic metadata. His scripts are flawless. His information is top tier. Yet, early in 2026, his retention graphs consistently plummeted before the 1-minute mark. The fatal flaw was his visual execution. Thomas was filming his deep dive masterclasses sitting completely motionless in an expensive desk chair, utilizing a single static webcam shot that captured his entire upper body and a sterile white wall behind him. The visual field was completely dead. He expected his highly technical script to carry the entire weight of audience retention, fundamentally ignoring the physiological reality of the human attention span. We completely restructured Thomas's visual approach using kinetic frame isolation, and the historical trends of his channel immediately reversed. He did not purchase a multi-camera studio setup. He simply weaponized the equipment he already possessed. He began recording in native 4K resolution, which allowed him to utilize software cropping in post-production without losing visual fidelity. We instructed him to map his flawless script to specific visual planes. During his introduction and broad conceptual explanations, he utilized the standard wide shot. However, the exact millisecond he delivered a critical data point, such as the specific line of Python code required to authenticate the API, he applied a harsh instantaneous 25% digital zoom in his editing software, cutting directly to a tight close-up of his face. This sudden shift in visual proximity is known as a Z-axis pattern interrupt. By digitally pushing the camera closer to his face on a critical sentence, he simulated the physical act of leaning across a table to tell the viewer a high-stakes secret. This artificial proximity triggers a distinct neurochemical response, forging a parasocial bond and immediately resetting the viewer's attention span. Furthermore, we overhauled how Thomas presented his B-roll. When he needed to show his audience how the Gemini API processed a prompt, he did not just cut to a static screen recording. A static screen recording is visual poison. Instead, he applied a slow, continuous 10% scale and position keyframe to the screen recording. The text on the screen was constantly, subtly sliding from right to left, forcing the viewer's eye to track the movement while they read the code. By simply adding relentless, subtle motion to every single frame of his video, Thomas commanded the algorithm to recognize his content as highly engaging, dynamic media, resulting in massive distribution across the platform. This strict visual framework is not limited to tech tutorials. It is an absolute necessity for physical product businesses and e-commerce creators who are struggling to maintain relevance. Consider a small business owner named Emily based in Denver, Colorado, who specializes in meticulously crafting complex golden floral framed needlepoint artwork. In previous iterations of her content, Emily would mount her smartphone on a rigid overhead stand and film a continuous 10-minute time-lapse of her hands working on the canvas. While the final needlepoint artwork was stunning, the visual journey was monotonous. The platform's machine learning models actively scan video files for motion vectors and scene changes. A video with minimal scene changes is categorized as low effort or background media, and its reach is severely restricted. To break out of her engagement slump, Emily applied kinetic frame isolation to her physical craft. She stopped filming a single continuous angle. Instead, she broke her needlepoint process down into 3 distinct visual tiers. First, she captured the macro detail, an extreme tightly cropped shot of the steel needle violently piercing the tight fabric, visually highlighting the physical tension of the thread. Second, she captured the medium perspective, a shot angled from the side, demonstrating the intense, focused posture of her body as she navigated a particularly difficult floral pattern. Third, she captured the macro environment, a wide, chaotic shot showing her massive collection of colored threads scattered across her studio floor. In the editing phase, Emily rapidly cycled through these 3 distinct visual planes every 4 to 6 seconds. She synchronized the harsh visual cuts to the exact tempo of her spoken narrative. She never allowed the viewer's eye to rest. She forced them to experience the creation of the artwork from multiple physical perspectives, transforming a passive viewing experience into an active, visually thrilling documentary. The potential outcomes of this strategy are massive. By simply altering the visual pacing without changing the core product, Emily drastically increased her average view duration, signaling to the platform that her content was capable of holding national attention. Implementing this requires a strict, step-by-step adherence to basic cinematography rules that most creators ignore. First, you must establish visual contrast through lighting. You do not need expensive studio lights, but you absolutely must separate your physical body from your background. If your lighting is flat, your video looks two-dimensional, and no amount of digital zooming will create the necessary Z-axis tension. Utilize a simple practical lamp behind you to cast a subtle rim light on your shoulders, creating immediate 3-dimensional depth. Second, you must aggressively manage your negative space. Negative space is the empty area around your head in the video frame. If you have too much negative space above your head, you subconsciously project weakness and a lack of authority to the viewer. You must frame your initial shot so that the top of your head is nearly touching the upper boundary of the video, projecting dominance and commanding the visual hierarchy of the screen. Third, and perhaps most crucially, your visual transitions must perfectly mirror your auditory transitions. If your script introduces a massive paradigm-shifting concept, you cannot remain in the same visual frame you were in when you were explaining the basic introductory steps. The visual cut must happen precisely on the first syllable of the new, important sentence. This creates a psychological lock between the audio and the video, a multimodal synchronization that hyper-engages the viewer's cognitive processing. You are essentially building a bespoke, high-velocity visual environment specifically designed to trap and hold the American consumer's highly fractured attention span. However, you can write the most psychologically compelling script in the world, and you can edit your video with the absolute pinnacle of kinetic frame isolation, creating an undeniably gripping piece of media. But if the underlying architecture of your channel is fundamentally misaligned, none of this hard work will matter. You have built a flawless high-performance engine, but you have installed it into a vehicle with no steering wheel. The platform's neural network needs specific, behind-the-scenes instructions to know exactly which subset of the American population is psychologically primed to respond to your specific visual and auditory triggers. How do you force the algorithm to instantly categorize your highly optimized content without relying on the completely dead strategy of spamming generic hashtags? The answer lies in a hidden localized metadata architecture, a silent, structural communication channel between your final video file and the platform's distribution hub. And if you do not manually configure this specific, hidden string of data within the platform's back-end settings before you press publish, your visual masterpiece will be permanently exiled to the wrong demographic. The era of relying on a block of 30 generic keywords at the bottom of your description box is entirely dead, and understanding why is the first step to reclaiming your algorithmic authority. For years, creators operated under the deeply flawed assumption that the machine learning models required manual text inputs to understand the context of a video. They would stuff their uploads with broad terms, hoping to cast the widest possible net. In 2026, the artificial intelligence governing content distribution is vastly more sophisticated than the creators attempting to manipulate it. The system no longer reads your hashtags to determine what your video is about. It utilizes advanced natural language processing to instantly transcribe every spoken word, analyzes the visual frame utilizing object recognition technology, and cross-references this data against the historical consumption patterns of the viewer. When you rely on outdated keyword stuffing, you are communicating with a legacy system that no longer dictates reach. Instead, you must communicate directly with the modern algorithmic infrastructure through strict, localized back-end metadata configuration. To fully grasp the severity of this structural requirement, we must examine the highly technical case study of a digital architect named Kevin, operating out of a studio in Chicago. Kevin possessed an elite understanding of content creation and back-end development. He recognized that manual uploading was incredibly inefficient, so he dedicated months to programming a custom Python script designed to completely automate his entire channel management process. His program was structurally brilliant. It utilized secure authentication to access the platform infrastructure, automatically uploaded his high-resolution video files, and seamlessly integrated advanced generative language models to draft his descriptions. He even engineered the system to deploy complex image generation tools to automatically design his thumbnails. Kevin had successfully built a frictionless, automated distribution machine capable of outputting a massive volume of educational content. However, despite this overwhelming technical superiority, the historical trends of his channel were disastrous. His highly polished, highly retained videos were being distributed to international demographics that completely lacked the purchasing power or the cultural context to engage with his specific American business strategies. His audience retention would flatline not because the content was poor, but because the algorithm was serving his advanced Chicago real estate analysis to viewers in entirely different hemispheres. Kevin treated his analytics as a clinical diagnostic tool and discovered a massive, glaring omission in his automated pipeline. His custom Python program was successfully pushing the video file and the title, but it was completely failing to explicitly define the hidden geographical and categorical metadata strings required to lock the content strictly to the United States market. Kevin immediately restructured his back-end approach, and you must manually replicate this exact architecture whether you are utilizing a complex API script or simply clicking through the standard upload interface. The first mandatory adjustment is the explicit declaration of your video location and default audio language. You cannot allow the platform to guess this information. If the machine learning model is forced to spend processing power attempting to verify your linguistic demographic, it will inherently throttle your initial distribution velocity. You must navigate to the advanced settings of your upload portal and permanently lock your video location to the United States. Furthermore, you must explicitly set your video language to English United States and definitively declare your caption certification. This acts as a cryptographic handshake with the platform, instantly bypassing the preliminary geographical sorting filters and immediately placing your media in the domestic testing pool. But the geographical lock is merely the foundation. The most critical and frequently ignored lever for domestic audience capture lies within the hyper-specific categorization mechanics. The vast majority of creators blindly select the education or how-to category and immediately press publish, completely ignoring the cascading drop-down menus that appear once a category is established. This is a fatal error in 2026. When you select the education category, the algorithm demands further contextual data to properly index the depth and target demographic of your information. You are presented with a series of highly specific data fields including the type of educational content, the specific academic level, and most importantly, the academic system. When Kevin audited his failing automated uploads, he realized his script was entirely bypassing these fields, leaving them null. The algorithm, completely devoid of this specific context, essentially guessed who might want to watch his real estate tutorials and distributed them entirely randomly. To reverse this, Kevin updated his program to inject strict categorical parameters into his API payload. He explicitly set the academic system to the United States. He defined the educational level, and he clearly outlined the precise concepts being taught in the backend metadata tags. By manually configuring this specific, hidden string of data, Kevin immediately localized his content. The algorithm stopped testing his videos globally and began hyper-targeting domestic consumers who had a documented history of engaging with American educational standards and localized business content. The potential outcomes of this single micro-adjustment were staggering. His engagement metrics stabilized, his click-through rates normalized, and his channel finally began to scale. This level of granular control is not optional if you intend to compete at a high level. You must treat every single upload as a highly targeted surgical strike. Every data field you leave blank is a decision you are surrendering to an artificial intelligence that does not care about your business goals. By locking down your geographic location, your localized language, and your specific American academic and categorical systems, You drastically reduce the algorithmic friction required to find your perfect viewer. You are mathematically eliminating the possibility of your content being tested on the wrong audience, thereby protecting your average view duration from catastrophic early drop-offs caused by cultural or linguistic irrelevance. You have now established a flawless foundation. You have diagnosed the fatal flaws in your overarching strategy. You have mastered the psychological deployment of cognitive tension to survive the critical first 800 milliseconds. You understand how to eliminate the contextual preamble and write highly retentive, fast-paced educational scripts. You have implemented kinetic frame isolation to physically trap the visual processing centers of your viewers, and you have rigorously locked down your back-end metadata to ensure your masterpiece is delivered exactly to the United States demographic. Your video is technically and structurally perfect. You press publish. And yet, there is one final, completely invisible algorithmic gauntlet your content must survive in the immediate 60 minutes following your upload. This is a highly volatile, highly punitive phase of the distribution cycle, where the platform actively attempts to stress test the structural integrity of your audience network. If you fail to manage this specific 1-hour window, all of your meticulous scripting and editing will be instantly neutralized, and the algorithm will permanently cap your reach before your video even has a chance to breathe. The immediate 60 minutes following your upload, colloquially known in data science circles as the velocity window, is the most highly volatile and highly punitive phase of the distribution cycle, where the platform actively attempts to stress test the structural integrity of your audience network. If you fail to manage this specific 1-hour window, all of your meticulous scripting and editing will be instantly neutralized, and the algorithm will permanently cap your reach before your video even has a chance to breathe. In the current operational reality of 2026, the platforms do not immediately distribute your new upload to your entire subscriber base or follower list. That is a fundamental misconception. Instead, the artificial intelligence isolates a microfraction of your most active, historically engaged viewers. This is your initial testing pool. The system serves your video to this small cohort and rigorously monitors their immediate behavioral telemetry to determine if the content possesses enough kinetic momentum to justify widespread distribution across the United States. Let us examine a highly specific case study that illustrates the devastating consequences of misunderstanding this velocity window. Consider a creator named Brian based in Miami, Florida, who produces highly educational content demystifying complex car insurance claims and policy structures for the domestic market. Brian recognized the necessity of production efficiency, so he spent weeks developing a custom Python program utilizing the YouTube Data API version 3 to fully automate his upload schedule. His script was designed to push his finalized video files, perfectly optimized titles, and localized metadata precisely at his perceived peak audience time of 4 in the afternoon. Brian executed his structural plan flawlessly. However, he committed the absolute cardinal sin of the modern digital economy: automated abandonment. The exact millisecond his Python script successfully published the upload, Brian closed his computer and transitioned to other business tasks, completely ignoring the live environment. The algorithm pushed his car insurance masterclass to his initial testing pool. Within the first 10 minutes, a subset of highly engaged viewers clicked on the video, consumed the initial high-retention hook, and immediately scrolled to the comment section to ask vital, clarifying questions regarding uninsured motorist coverage in their specific states. Because Brian engaged in automated abandonment and was not physically present to monitor the launch, these initial viewers received absolute silence. They asked their questions, waited a few seconds, and then permanently closed the application to find a more responsive creator. The machine learning models immediately registered this sequence of events as a catastrophic failure in session duration. The algorithm concluded that Brian's video was a conversational dead end that caused users to terminate their active app sessions, and within 45 minutes, the platform entirely choked his impression supply, flatlining a video that took him 40 hours to produce. To survive the velocity window and force the algorithm to open the distribution floodgates, you must abandon the set-it-and-forget-it mentality and implement what industry professionals refer to as the active incubation protocol. You must treat the first 60 minutes of your upload as a live, highly critical event, requiring your undivided, aggressive participation. The moment your video goes live, you must immediately execute the pinned provocation strategy. You cannot simply pin a generic comment thanking your audience for watching. That provides zero cognitive friction. You must pin a highly polarizing, deeply analytical question directly related to the core thesis of your video. If you are producing content about localized real estate, Your pinned comment must ask the viewer to publicly state whether they believe the current zoning laws are fundamentally destroying their neighborhood equity. You are demanding a stance. This forces the viewer to engage in cognitive processing and type a detailed response, drastically increasing the time they spend on your video page, which the algorithm logs as a massive positive signal for average view duration. Simultaneously, you must initiate the notification loop. During this critical first hour, you must physically remain on the platform and reply to every single incoming comment within 60 seconds of its publication. This is not about mere community building. This is a highly calculated exploitation of platform mechanics. When a user leaves a comment and you instantly reply, the platform immediately pushes a high-priority notification back to that user's mobile device. Because the interaction is instantaneous, the user is highly likely to click that notification, physically reopening the application and returning to your video to read your specific response. By forcing the user to initiate a second, immediate viewing session, you artificially inflate your community interaction score and send a blindingly clear signal to the artificial intelligence that your content is an active, highly engaging communal hub rather than a passive broadcast. Imagine if you are a technical creator named Alex operating out of Austin, Texas, running a highly niche channel dedicated to advanced programming, specifically teaching viewers how to leverage generative models like the Gemini API for complex data sorting. Your audience is inherently analytical and highly prone to asking multi-layered, technical questions in the comment section regarding your specific code architecture. If you utilize an automated Python script to publish your video at noon, but you do not physically log into the platform to monitor the live chat until 5 in the evening, you have squandered the most critical algorithmic evaluation period in existence. The first 50 developers who asked about your specific implementation of the API endpoint received zero technical support. The platform interprets this sustained silence as a dead community and violently restricts your reach to the broader programming demographic. Furthermore, elite creators in 2026 do not passively accept their initial click-through rate during the velocity window. They actively manipulate it through aggressive, real-time telemetry monitoring. You must obsessively watch your analytics during the first 15 minutes. If your initial click-through rate falls even 1 percentage point below your historical channel average, you cannot wait and hope the market corrects itself. You must execute an immediate dynamic thumbnail swap. Sophisticated channels often build secondary automation scripts that monitor the API for real-time performance data. If the primary visual packaging fails to convert the initial testing pool, they instantly trigger a swap to a secondary pre-designed thumbnail, often generated using highly saturated, high-contrast tools like Imagen 4.0 models, to act as an immediate A/B test. This real-time adaptation is strictly necessary to prevent the algorithm from permanently classifying your video as low-interest media before the first hour concludes. We can also observe the profound impact of external traffic validation during this highly volatile period. Let us examine a creator named Amanda based in Seattle, Washington, who designs and sells complex, physical products, specifically classic red rose framed needlepoint artwork. Amanda recognized that her organic reach was suffering, so she leveraged the golden hour by executing a coordinated external traffic surge. The exact moment her video went live, she immediately deployed a highly targeted email newsletter and a cross-platform community poll, explicitly directing her most loyal external customers to click the new link to vote on a specific threading technique demonstrated in the video. The algorithm heavily scrutinizes the origin of your traffic. When Amanda's video received a sudden massive influx of highly targeted, high-retention external traffic directly within the first 20 minutes, the internal platform distribution network immediately overrode its standard, cautious testing phase. The system interpreted this external demand as an undeniable signal of high market value and instantly opened the internal impression floodgates, pushing her content to millions of craft-based consumers across the country. When you successfully execute the active incubation protocol, manage your real-time click-through rate telemetry, and validate your content with immediate community interaction, you mathematically force the algorithm to transition your upload from the micro-testing pool to the macro-distribution phase. The artificial intelligence has fundamentally accepted your video as a high-value attention asset and begins aggressively pushing your thumbnail to millions of homepages across the entire United States demographic. You are finally experiencing the exact massive viral surge you meticulously engineered. However, this massive untargeted algorithmic distribution carries a hidden, devastating mathematical consequence that actively destroys scaling channels every single day. If you do not possess the precise structural mechanism to filter and capture this sudden, violent influx of national attention, the algorithm will rapidly recalibrate, interpret your massive influx of new, casual viewers as a catastrophic negative signal, and violently crush your historical reach, leaving your digital business mathematically worse off than before the viral event even occurred. This catastrophic mathematical consequence is known within advanced data analytics as audience dilution, and it is the exact mechanism that destroys channels immediately following their first major viral success in the United States. To understand how to survive this algorithmic hazard, you must completely reframe your understanding of how artificial intelligence evaluates your media. When your initial velocity window is successful, the platform transitions your upload from the micro-testing pool into macro distribution. Your thumbnail is suddenly being served to millions of casual consumers on the national homepage. These are individuals who have absolutely zero prior relationship with your brand. They are not clicking because they trust your authority. They are clicking purely because your visual packaging and high-stakes title triggered a primal curiosity reflex. This creates a massive structural vulnerability. These casual viewers lack the foundational context of your core audience. If your video immediately dives into highly technical jargon or deep historical channel lore without building a psychological bridge, these new viewers experience instant cognitive overload. They will abandon your video within 30 seconds. Now, consider the mathematical reality of this behavioral pattern. Imagine your initial testing pool of 1,000 core subscribers delivered a phenomenal 60% average view duration. The algorithm rewards this and pushes the video to 100,000 new, untargeted viewers. If those 100,000 viewers bounce after 10 seconds, your channel's aggregate average view duration plummets into the single digits. The machine learning models do not view this as a successful viral video. They view it as a fundamentally flawed piece of media that accidentally manipulated a mass audience into clicking. The algorithm instantly heavily penalizes the video, permanently capping its reach, and severely downgrades your overall channel authority. Let us examine a highly specific, data-driven scenario involving a rapidly scaling domestic channel named Anana Creation. The operator of this channel had perfectly mastered the back-end automation frameworks we discussed previously. She engineered a highly sophisticated Python program that directly interfaced with the YouTube Data API version 3. She successfully utilized the advanced multimodal capabilities of Gemini 2.5 Pro to flawlessly calibrate her video metadata and deployed Imagen 4.0 fallback models to automatically generate striking, high-contrast visual packaging. Her content focused on a highly lucrative financial vertical, specifically analyzing the 5 mistakes to avoid when getting car insurance quotes online. The technical execution by Anana Creation was flawless. Her velocity window was managed perfectly, and the algorithm registered the initial high retention, blasting the video to the top of recommended feeds across the entire country. However, a structural disaster occurred during the macro distribution phase. The script of the video was designed exclusively for her existing, highly educated audience of financial analysts. When the broader United States demographic arrived, expecting a highly accessible, simplified explanation of domestic car insurance, they were immediately bombarded with complex actuarial terminology and dense, state-specific liability matrices within the first 2 minutes. The mass audience, experiencing severe cognitive friction, abandoned the video in droves. The platform observed this massive, undeniable wave of session terminations. It aggressively recalibrated, pulled the video from the national distribution pool, and permanently mathematically handicapped her channel authority. Her subsequent uploads, even those that were technically perfect, received a fraction of their historical reach because her underlying algorithmic trust was entirely devastated by her own uncontrolled viral success. To prevent audience dilution and physically capture a macro audience, you must engineer a viral onboarding funnel directly into the structural pacing of your script. You must operate under the absolute assumption that at any given minute, a completely uneducated viewer who knows nothing about your niche has just entered the broadcast. You solve this through a scripting technique called contextual anchoring. Every 3 minutes, you must dedicate exactly 10 seconds to aggressively restating the core premise and the high stakes of your video using universally understood, simplified language. You are essentially providing a micro-summary that rehooks the casual viewer and justifies their continued attention. Let us contrast the failure of the complex insurance video with a massive retention success in the physical product space. Imagine a creator operating out of New York in 2026, selling specialized physical goods like classic red rose framed needlepoint artwork and highly intricate golden floral framed needlepoint artwork. Her content visually showcases the grueling, hyper-specific manufacturing process of these items. When her video explaining the microscopic details of threading gold foil hits the macro algorithm, millions of people who have never held a needle in their lives suddenly flood the upload. If she simply continues threading in silence, relying entirely on visual aesthetic, the mass audience will quickly habituate and leave. Instead, she survives the dilution by deploying a precise contextual anchor. At the 2-minute mark, just as the casual viewer's attention span begins to fracture because they do not grasp the technical difficulty of the process, she completely pauses the physical action. She cuts to a direct, tight camera angle and states clearly that while this specific golden floral technique looks simple on screen, it is a volatile historical method that permanently ruins 70% of the canvases it is attempted on, completely explaining why this specific piece of needlepoint artwork commands a massive premium in the current market. She instantly translated an incredibly niche technical skill into a universally understood human concept. High financial stakes, extreme difficulty, and the very real threat of catastrophic failure. The mass audience, completely uneducated in the art of needlepoint, is suddenly anchored to the narrative. They understand the exact risk involved in the next frame of the video. Their retention stabilizes, they continue watching to see if she succeeds or destroys the canvas, and the algorithm pushes the video even further into the ecosystem. This contextual anchoring technique is the critical difference between creating content exclusively for a micro-community and engineering content capable of sustaining national algorithmic distribution. Community content assumes prior knowledge and comfortable pacing. Algorithmic content assumes absolute ignorance but never insults the intelligence of the viewer. You must constantly weave these narrative anchors seamlessly into your presentation. If you are leveraging Python scripts and generative models like Gemini 2.5 Pro to assist in your channel management, you must explicitly program those models to review your transcripts and actively flag the exact moments where a layperson would experience cognitive overload. You then manually inject a 10-second high-stakes anchor precisely at those timestamps. By executing this strategy, you convert the volatile influx of casual viewers into an incredibly powerful positive signal. You maintain your average view duration, even as your impression count scales into the millions, forcing the artificial intelligence to permanently elevate your channel into the highest tier of domestic algorithmic authority. You have solved the visual pacing, you have conquered the hidden metadata, and you have successfully filtered a viral audience. Your video is generating massive, sustained views. But there is one final, entirely silent metric operating in the background of the platform that determines your actual financial survival in the digital economy. It is a metric that the majority of creators completely ignore, focusing entirely on vanity views, and it is the exact reason why channels with millions of impressions still go bankrupt. If you do not actively manipulate this specific data point, the platform will completely demonetize your traffic and refuse to serve your future content, regardless of how high your retention graph climbs. This specific data point is the terminal exit rate, intricately tied to your overall session contribution metric. To fully comprehend why the platform will ruthlessly throttle a video with exceptional audience retention, you must understand the fundamental economic reality of social media conglomerates in the year 2026. These platforms are not public utilities designed to host your educational content out of goodwill. They are aggressive, highly optimized digital advertising brokers. Their entire revenue model depends entirely on keeping the American consumer locked inside their application ecosystem for as many consecutive minutes as humanly possible, serving them highly targeted commercial inventory between videos. When a viewer clicks on your upload, the artificial intelligence immediately begins tracking their session telemetry. If your video is spectacular, holding their undivided attention for 15 solid minutes, but then prompts that user to close the application and return to their daily life, your video is mathematically categorized as a session killer. You have effectively acted as a stop sign on the digital highway. The algorithm will quickly learn that pushing your content, regardless of its internal quality, ultimately results in the termination of a user session and a direct loss of advertising revenue. Consequently, the platform will completely restrict your future impressions to protect its own bottom line. To visualize the devastating impact of a high terminal exit rate, let us examine the historical trends of technical creators who rely heavily on algorithmic distribution. Imagine if you are an advanced digital architect named Christopher operating out of Seattle, Washington. Christopher is developing a highly complex Python program designed to completely automate the back-end management of his entire content network. He spends weeks meticulously debugging scripts that interact with the YouTube Data API version 3, solving intricate API quota limitations and perfecting automated video scheduling times. Furthermore, Christopher integrates state-of-the-art generative models, utilizing the Gemini API for highly advanced video processing, dynamic tagging, and rich metadata generation, while deploying Imagen 4.0 models to autonomously render high-contrast, click-optimized thumbnails. His technical execution is an absolute masterclass in digital leverage. His tutorials are incredibly dense, and his core audience of domestic developers watches his videos from beginning to end, resulting in a phenomenal 70% average view duration. However, Christopher commits a fatal psychological error in the final 30 seconds of every single upload. He utilizes conclusion language. He wraps up his Python tutorials by summarizing what the viewer just learned, thanking them for their time, asking them to subscribe to the channel, and wishing them a good day. By utilizing this traditional, highly outdated outro format, Christopher is actively triggering cognitive closure within the viewer's brain. The human neurological system is constantly seeking the completion of tasks to conserve energy. When Christopher signals that the educational event is over, the viewer experiences a minor dopamine release associated with task completion, their cortisol levels stabilize, and their subconscious immediately directs them to close the application to transition to a new physical activity. Christopher inadvertently engineered the perfect exit point. The machine learning models observe this mass exodus occurring precisely at the end of his otherwise brilliant tutorials and permanently flag his channel as a low-value session contributor. To fundamentally reverse this negative trajectory and force the algorithm to recognize your content as a session multiplier, you must entirely eradicate conclusion language from your vocabulary and implement a structural framework known as the seamless binge matrix. The objective is to flawlessly transition the psychological momentum of your current video directly into the beginning of your next video, completely bypassing the viewer's conscious decision-making process. You must eliminate the neurological signal of cognitive closure by engineering a new, high-stakes knowledge gap precisely when the viewer expects the video to end. This requires a rigorous 4-step sequential execution that you must script into the final 20 seconds of your content with absolute precision. The first step of the seamless binge matrix is the premature pivot. You must completely abruptly halt your current line of thought before the viewer realizes the primary educational payload has been fully delivered. The second step is the immediate knowledge gap. You must instantly introduce a terrifying new variable or a massive, overlooked complication directly related to the problem you just solved. The third step is the visual command, where you physically point to a specific region of the screen where your end screen element will appear. The fourth step is the abrupt cut, where the video instantly terminates mid-breath, offering no traditional goodbye. We can observe the profound potential outcomes of this framework by analyzing a domestic case study involving a financial educator named Amanda, based in Dallas, Texas. Amanda produces highly targeted educational media focusing on the 5 mistakes to avoid when getting car insurance quotes online, specifically tailoring her complex actuarial breakdowns for a United States audience. In her early content, Amanda would finish explaining the 5 mistakes and cleanly conclude the video. Her terminal exit rate was catastrophic. Upon implementing the seamless binge matrix, her strategy shifted radically. After aggressively breaking down the 5th mistake regarding online quotes, she executed a premature pivot. She stopped, leaned directly into the camera lens, and stated that perfectly avoiding those 5 online quoting mistakes is entirely financially useless if you do not understand the hidden, devastating liability clauses that insurance adjusters use to deny payouts during a major highway collision. She immediately established a massive new knowledge gap. She then executed the visual command, pointing to the right side of the frame, stating that she breaks down exactly how to legally protect yourself from those specific liability denials in the video right there. Immediately after the word there, she applied the abrupt cut. The video went to black. Amanda completely denied her viewers the neurological release of cognitive closure. They came to learn about online quotes, but in the final 10 seconds, they were suddenly terrified about highway liability denials. Their brain required immediate resolution to this newly introduced cognitive friction. Because Amanda perfectly positioned the dynamic end screen element directly where she pointed, the viewer instinctively clicked the new video to resolve the psychological tension. By engineering this seamless transition, Amanda effectively doubled her session contribution metric overnight. The platform's artificial intelligence registered that viewers who watched Amanda's content did not leave the application. They immediately consumed a second piece of media, thereby generating double the advertising inventory. The algorithm rewarded this highly lucrative behavioral pattern by aggressively amplifying her channel authority and pushing her entire catalog into the national macro distribution feed. This high-retention transition framework is equally critical for creators outside the financial and technical sectors, particularly those operating within hyper-specific physical product niches. Consider a creator based in Boston producing high-end, classic red rose framed needlepoint artwork and complex golden floral framed needlepoint artwork. If she concludes a grueling 15-minute documentary detailing the intricate sourcing of her specific red rose threading materials by simply thanking her audience for watching her craft, she will lose them to the platform interface. Instead, she must pivot seamlessly. As she places the final thread on the classic red rose piece, she must look at the camera and state that while this specific red canvas requires immense patience, it is mathematically simple compared to the highly volatile, fragile threading required to properly execute a golden floral framed needlepoint artwork without permanently fracturing the underlying structure, which she demonstrates exactly how to survive in the video right here. The cut must be instantaneous. The viewer, already deeply invested in the physical stakes of the needlepoint process, is propelled directly into the next phase of her catalog without a single moment to process the transition. When you successfully master the seamless binge matrix, you are no longer just fighting for individual video views. You are actively hijacking the platform's overarching session architecture. You are transforming your independent uploads into an inescapable, highly retentive web of interconnected media. The machine learning models will inherently prioritize your entire channel because you have proven that you possess the structural capability to retain the American consumer longer than your competitors. You have optimized your back-end data. You have mastered the deployment of cognitive tension. You have structured your visual framing to prevent habituation. And you have mathematically locked the viewer into an endless consumption loop. You have essentially beaten the immediate algorithmic filters. However, surviving the algorithm and physically surviving the content creation industry are two entirely different disciplines. Creating media at this absolute pinnacle of psychological and technical efficiency requires a relentless, almost inhuman level of consistent output. If you attempt to sustain this pace using manual labor, you will inevitably encounter the final, most destructive barrier in the digital economy: systemic creator burnout. To permanently secure your position at the top of the United States market, you must transition from a content creator to a content architect, building invisible, highly autonomous operational systems that completely detach your time from your production volume. A process that requires a radical restructuring of your daily operational workflow. The defining characteristic of the American digital economy in 2026 is absolute scale. The machine learning algorithms demand a relentless, uninterrupted stream of high-retention media to satisfy the consumption habits of the United States demographic. If your current operational model relies on you manually executing every single micro-task associated with content production, you are operating on a mathematically terminal timeline. You are trading finite biological energy for digital impressions, and human biology will inevitably lose that transaction. The historical trends of the creator economy are littered with highly talented individuals who achieved a massive viral breakthrough, only to completely abandon their channels 6 months later because they could not psychologically or physically sustain the required output. They failed to recognize that true digital wealth is not generated by filming videos. It is generated by engineering the complex logistical systems that distribute those videos. You must immediately elevate your perspective from being a mere participant in the algorithm to becoming the architect of your own automated media conglomerate. To fully understand the mechanics of this radical restructuring, we must deeply analyze the operational architecture of a highly advanced digital entity like the Anana Creation Network. This specific channel model serves as the ultimate historical case study for completely detaching human time from algorithmic distribution. The operator behind this network recognized early on that manually clicking through the upload portal, typing out localized metadata, and hand-designing thumbnails was an incredible waste of high-level cognitive function. Instead of working inside the channel, she spent weeks actively building a structural shell around the channel. She developed a highly sophisticated, custom Python program designed to completely bypass the standard user interface and interface directly with the YouTube Data API version 3. This was not a simple scheduling tool. It was a bespoke digital assembly line. She mapped out her entire optimal upload schedule for the entire quarter, specifically targeting the high-traffic afternoon windows of the domestic United States time zones, and programmed the script to autonomously push the massive high-resolution video files directly to the platform servers, while she was entirely focused on deep research or physical rest. However, constructing this level of automation introduces severe, highly technical challenges that immediately break amateur operations. When you transition to programmatic uploading, you are suddenly forced to navigate strict platform constraints, specifically daily API quota limits. Many creators attempt to build these systems and immediately fail because their poorly optimized scripts constantly ping the platform servers for unnecessary status updates, rapidly draining their allocated data allowance and causing their automated uploads to crash mid-cycle. The Anana creation architecture solved this by implementing strict batched payload delivery, ensuring that the script only communicated with the platform when absolutely necessary, thereby preserving the API quota for the heavy lifting of video processing and metadata injection. Furthermore, she recognized that an automated upload is entirely useless if the video is served to the wrong demographic. She hard-coded the specific geographical parameters into her Python script, ensuring that every single automated release explicitly instructed the algorithm to lock the target location to the United States and the academic system to the domestic standard, completely eliminating the risk of her complex car insurance tutorials being distributed to international viewers who had absolutely no use for American liability frameworks. But the physical upload is only the logistical foundation. The true leverage of the 2026 digital architect lies in the complete automation of creative packaging through advanced generative models. Relying on your own subjective artistic taste to design visual packaging is a massive structural vulnerability. The Anana creation workflow entirely eliminated this human bottleneck by seamlessly integrating the Gemini 2.5 Pro architecture directly into her Python automation script. She did not use this artificial intelligence to write generic scripts. She utilized its advanced multimodal capabilities to deeply analyze the raw transcripts of her finalized videos. The script would automatically feed the text into the Gemini API, instructing the model to extract the absolute highest stakes narrative tension points, and then automatically generate hyper-optimized, localized video descriptions and deeply targeted tagging structures designed specifically to trigger the domestic search algorithm. For the visual packaging, the system was engineered with brilliant redundancy. She programmed the script to simultaneously generate multiple variations of the video thumbnail, using distinct artificial intelligence models. She utilized the primary generative system to create the baseline visual concept, but specifically integrated Imagen 4.0 models as a robust fallback mechanism to guarantee that the final rendered image possessed the exact high-contrast, hyper-saturated visual aesthetic that historically dominates the American click-through rate data. By automating this entire creative pipeline, she effectively cloned her own strategic intelligence. Her Python script could diagnose the core appeal of a video about the 5 mistakes to avoid when getting car insurance quotes online and automatically generate the perfect psychological packaging for it in seconds, a process that used to drain hours of her daily operational energy. This level of architectural thinking is absolutely mandatory even if you operate entirely outside the software or financial education spaces. Consider the application of this systemic leverage within a highly tactile physical product business. Imagine a dedicated creator based in Oregon who spends 80 hours a week meticulously crafting complex physical items, specifically focusing on classic red rose framed needlepoint artwork and golden floral framed needlepoint artwork. She physically cannot automate the grueling, highly specialized manual labor required to punch the thread into the canvas. Her biological time is strictly tied to the creation of the physical inventory. If she is also forced to manually edit the footage, write the descriptions, and manage the upload schedule, her business will collapse under its own weight. To survive and scale, she must aggressively apply the Anana creation methodology to her digital distribution. She must implement automated camera switching software in her studio that responds to her voice commands, entirely eliminating the need for a secondary camera operator. She must utilize macro lens tracking systems that automatically keep the needlepoint in perfect, sharp focus as she moves, completely removing the need for post-production zooming and cropping. And most importantly, she must adopt the exact same Python API distribution framework to handle the massive data load of her daily documentary uploads. By systematically delegating every single digital task to an automated system, she reclaims her entire week, allowing her to focus exclusively on the physical creation of the golden floral artwork, which is the singular, irreplaceable core value of her entire enterprise. This is the ultimate evolution of the digital creator in the United States market. You must ruthlessly audit every single action you take on a daily basis and ask yourself if a highly calibrated script or an advanced generative model could execute that specific task with 90% of your accuracy? If the answer is yes, you are actively losing money by continuing to do it yourself. You must build the invisible systems. You must master the APIs. You must leverage the language models. You must transform your channel from a fragile, personality-driven broadcast into a robust, highly autonomous media machine capable of surviving your own physical absence. You now possess the complete structural blueprint. You understand the brutal psychology of the initial hook, the visual necessity of kinetic frame isolation, the hidden power of localized metadata, the survival tactics for the velocity window, the mathematical protection against audience dilution, and the ultimate architectural necessity of total workflow automation. You have the exact roadmap required to monopolize digital attention in this current calendar year. However, perfectly executing this entire automated system exposes you to a completely new, entirely terrifying vulnerability. You have built an unstoppable machine that relies entirely on a fixed set of algorithmic rules. But what happens to your massive automated empire when the central platform inevitably pushes a silent, undocumented update to their core machine learning model that fundamentally punishes the exact automated behaviors you just spent months perfectly engineering?